This is Metabolic Mastery, a core medical technologies podcast dedicated to advancing knowledge and practice in metabolic testing. Welcome to Metabolic Mastery, brought to you by Core Medical Technologies. I'm Dr. Marc Humbert, and this is my co-host, Dr. Cameron Garber. And today we're going to be talking about calories in versus calories out. So is it really that, or is it something else? And this is a somewhat controversial topic, I suppose. But what we really want to do is provide some clarification and talk about the physiology and weight loss in general, and why that can feel so hard and why there's so many conflicting messages. And I think part of the difficulty is people are just exhausted by simplified advice. Yeah. Just eat less. It's hormones, it's sugar, it's ultra-processed foods, right? It's this one thing, and if we just attack that issue, then everything will be good. And so this simplification just has people wondering, like, oh, what do I actually do? What actually matters?
Where is the truth behind this? Because we do like to silo it into like, oh, it's all just carbs.
Yeah.
It's all, or it's all the terrible ultra processed foods that we're eating, or it's all these things. And the truth is, it's not any one of those things. And so calories in, calories out often gets like either maligned, or people say, no, it's just calories in, calories out. And so where's the truth in all of that? So unfortunately, calories in, calories out has become like, either you beat yourself up for it because I must just be a failure because I can't get the calorie balance right, or it's people, dismiss it altogether and be like, it's not calories in, calories out. It's not that. It's this and that and the other, hormones and these other things. And the truth is in the middle. So is it calories in, calories out? Yes, absolutely. In the end, we if we're eating an excess of calories, that eventually does lead to weight gain. If we're eating a deficit of calories, that eventually does lead to weight loss or fat loss. But it's not that simple. So yes, in the end, if you consistently maintain that, but there's so many other lifestyle and environmental factors that play into that make it not that easy of an equation. It's not just a mathematical formula quite.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe a better way to phrase it would be energy in and energy out, because it's really weight loss and weight gain and what's happening with our metabolism really is a matter of where energy is going. How is it being used? How is it being stored? How is it being liberated, right, from the food that we eat? And so all of those things go into the equation, right? Like there's so many things that are inputs into the energy in, and there's so many things in the energy output, like the energy that goes out side of things. And so understanding that, I think, can help us. And I think really the first big principle is that, again, calories in, calories out is really about stored energy, not daily scale weight per se. And so this is, I think, one of the big things is how we look at that. And so we don't want to ignore reality, but we do want to talk about the nuance of this and why it's not just scale weight.
Right. Oh, scale weight can be so deceiving. So I one time
story time
as a youth, as a 20 something, gained 7 pounds in one meal. So Thanksgiving, I weighed myself before Thanksgiving dinner and after Thanksgiving dinner, and I was up 7 pounds. Did I gain 7 pounds? No. Right? You can't gain 7 pounds in a day. That's wild. But it was, water retention from salty food. It was, the food in my gut and what hadn't yet digested and all of those other things. And so scale weight on a day-to-day basis has very little to do with change in fat mass, in all honesty. And so we have to be careful using the scale as our only measure of fat mass, for sure. And it's not always a very good proxy from a day-to-day basis in health or even healthy food choices. Something that may be a healthy food choice but has a little bit higher sodium may make you retain more water, and so you gained more weight, even though it was not a bad food choice, and your kidneys will do their job and eventually clear out that excess water weight and all those things.
Yeah. Well, and then you think like, I switched to a different macronutrient composition, and so now I'm eating, let's say, really low carbohydrate. carbohydrate, right? So every gram of carbohydrate that we store comes along with 3 to 4 grams of water. And so we drop our carbohydrates, we reduce our body stores, and we lose some water weight. But that doesn't necessarily tell us anything about our fat mass. And so we can see the scale go up, we can see the scale go down, we can see the scale stay the same. And we think that means, oh, I'm gaining fat mass or I'm losing fat mass or nothing's changing. When in fact, beneath the surface, we can see different things, right? We can be reducing fat mass even if we're retaining some water, or we can be changing our body composition such that we're losing some fat, we're gaining some muscle while weight stays the same, right? So there can be different things happening under the surface, but when we just boil it all down to scale weight alone, then that can cause some misconceptions. Now, the scale is helpful over the long term, right? So tracking trends over time. And so what's happening week over week, what's happening month over month? Is the general trend up or is it going down or is it staying stable?
Absolutely. If you started a weight loss journey at 400 pounds and now you're 220 pounds, clearly you have made some steps in the right direction in losing fat mass.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And so I think that's just the thing to understand, like water retention does not equal fat mass. But also it's like staying at the same weight or even if the scale goes up a little bit, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not losing fat mass. And so looking at some of those other indicators as well.
Right. And that's why some of these other indicators are really important. So a DEXA scan or other ways of looking at body composition, really, really helpful. VO2 test and a resting metabolic rate test, where we can look at how is the metabolism functioning and how has that changed over time. Do we see better indicators of a healthy metabolism? That then can be a really great indicator of how someone's actually doing, instead of just focusing on weight on the scale. Because sometimes we will see a lot of things kind of happening in the background in terms of health improvements and mitochondrial efficiency and people becoming more metabolically flexible, and all those things are happening kind of in the background before the weight loss really takes off. And so often we can see big improvements in people's health profile, even though the scale weight hasn't yet started to change. And so we have to be careful that if we're just basing it on that. And so calories in, calories out is a true principle. But if we're just using the scale to measure how we're doing with calories in, calories out, then we're not typically going to be successful, because it's not a sensitive enough measure for what we're actually trying to measure.
Yeah. One, it can just cause unnecessary anxiety. And so having some of that data from other things can be really helpful. And we've talked about this before, but I think that's one of the difficulties about data. Like data can be really good if you use it to make better decisions. Data is not good for beating yourself up with. Right. And so, but being able to look at those different metrics and seeing, as you mentioned, I'm actually getting healthier in these avenues while I'm doing this, then what I'm doing is actually working, right? It's helping me to build a healthier engine, if you will.
Right. Well, and the key to any fitness or health journey is establish the healthy lifestyle, right? Establish the patterns that will lead you toward the end goal. And once we've established those patterns and we're living that healthy lifestyle, then the natural result will be the outcomes that we're looking for. So sometimes we focus so much on the outcomes of the scale dropping, or even of body mass, lean mass increasing and fat mass dropping, and things like that, which those are good indicators of, is the lifestyle pattern that we've established working. But really focusing on the pattern, focusing on those habits is the big goal. And that's what we need to train our patients, train our clients to be able to do, is focus on the process and the systems in our life and lifestyle. And when we do that, the natural result of those things will then be those changes that we're looking for. And so that's the harder thing, is to focus on the systems in our life and lifestyle. But that really is the end goal.
Absolutely. Okay. So next, let's talk about going back to those sides of the equation, right? The calories inside, or the energy inside of the equation, and then the energy outside of the equation. Because I think that will help us dive into why it often feels like this doesn't work, right? Why that calories in, calories out, energy in, energy out paradigm doesn't seem to work. And I think this is where we'll dive into some of that nuance and explore, okay, like what's actually happening here, and why does this feel so hard?
Yeah.
So, I think the first thing on the calories in, there are just, as you mentioned in the beginning, it's not any one thing. There's just so many different inputs that go into both sides of the equation. But on the energy inside thing, we have things like appetite, right? Just how hungry am I?
Yeah.
We have do the package labels, are they actually accurate, right? We hope that they're fairly accurate, but some research suggests that like they're not always as accurate. There's variation.
Well, so I was thinking about that. Think of how often you go to your favorite restaurant and get that favorite dish. And sometimes you're like, oh man, normally there's way more meat with this rice bowl or whatever it is. And today it's really skimpy. Like they didn't put nearly as much meat today as they did last time. And up on the board, it'll say like this rice bowl has 824 calories. And it could be some days that it's 600 calories and other days it's 1,000 because they put, way more sauce on it or something like that. So there's a lot of variation in, restaurants or even prepackaged foods, but also when we prepare it ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that, we have got. So I'm eating the food, but how much of that am I actually absorbing? And so digestion, different like microbiota in your gut will change how much of that energy is actually liberated from the food. Also, just how that the food matrix that's packaged in. And so if there's, plants typically have things that make them a little bit harder to digest. And so, if it's really high in fiber, different things like that can make it harder to liberate the calories from that food versus like something that's highly processed. Not necessarily bad. It's just tends to be more energy dense. And often they remove even some of the water from that. So you can just pack a lot more calories into that small amount. It's often been processed in a way to make it easier to digest, right? Almost pre-digested, if you will. And so we eat that versus a whole food product. We might end up liberating more energy. We're more likely to liberate more energy from that highly processed product than from the more whole food.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's typically less fiber and it's easier to get. So I love to use a test with my clients. I call it the water test. And you think about it, if you were to toss your food, whatever you're about to eat, in a bowl of water and leave it for 20, 30 minutes, what would it look like at the end? And that kind of goes back to the digestibility of it, like how quickly broken down and digested and inserted into your bloodstream is this food. So the faster that breaks down in a bowl of water, it also speaks to how fast that's going to be absorbed by your body. So we talk about like glycemic load, how many grams of carbohydrate does it have? Versus the glycemic index, how quickly does that spike your blood sugar? Whole foods, if you think about an apple, if I toss an apple in a bowl of water and leave it for 20 minutes, there's no difference. It doesn't start to break down. Whereas applesauce, right, it turns into mush. Bread versus wheat berries themselves. You leave wheat berries in water.
I love wheat berries.
They're delicious. And you can leave them overnight and they're still not going to be that soaked up with water. Whereas bread, ground up wheat.
Also, I love bread. It's important to say that.
Yeah, it's delicious. But you toss that in a bowl of water and it's going to soak up that water and turn into mush, right? And so the speed with which that will be absorbed into my body is going to be different based on the wholeness of that food. That's one of my soapbox things is when they call like breakfast cereals whole grains. It's like, no, you maybe was made from a whole grain once upon a time. It is no longer
in a former life.
Yeah, in former life. It is. I've never seen an O-shaped grain before.
You got to search more places, maybe.
Yeah. When we process it down into something and press it into a form that then turns into mush within seconds of being exposed to milk, it is no longer a whole grain, a whole food, in my opinion, because now you've made the absorbability of it so much faster, which can be helpful in times like during a sporting event or a hike or while we're being active. That can be helpful to get calories in quickly. For our daily life, that often can cause problems where we get a big, bolus of blood sugar or other things. And so those types of things factor in differently depending on the state of that food, if you will.
Yeah. Well, so it's really interesting. Kevin Hall, he's a very famous nutrition researcher, so headed some stuff at NIH until recently. He's done a lot of work in this area. And in some of the research they looked at, this is actually really interesting. The kind of two factors that tended to lead people to overeat were energy density and hyperpalatability, right? This just tastes really good. Usually some combination of, salt, fat, or sugar. But what was interesting is they found that you could have ultra processed foods that hit both of those, but you could also have non-ultra processed foods that had high energy density and that were very palatable. And in both situations, people ate more. And so it wasn't necessarily the processing alone that did that, but those two factors of, is this very energy dense and is this very tasty, right? Does it have that combination of, you think like even grandma's homemade apple pie is going to be high in fats and sugars, very palatable. You pack a lot of calories into that, right? Yeah. And what they found is that ultra processed foods that were not super palatable and that were not super energy dense, people didn't tend to overconsume those, right?
And rice cakes.
Like rice.
I'm not eating rice.
Why is this my life? But anyway, so that was really interesting. And so that goes to like the physiology side of things, but also the psychology, right? It tends to increase our appetite and override our natural triggers. And one of the difficult things with things that are highly energy dense is that we can overeat them so quickly that we don't even get that full signal, right? We've just onboarded a ton of calories before we get that full signal. And so anyway, just those things are so important. So hormones can play into that, right? What is our appetite versus, does this increase? Does this decrease that? What's happening there? Stress, how are we sleeping? Things like that can impact what we're eating. And then what I do want to mention is our food environment. So what you mentioned is, can we make those changes? But I think this is part of the difficulty where we get into this, like if you are overweight or you struggle with eating or things like that, it's all your fault, right?
Right.
And then business is really good at shifting responsibility onto individual consumers. But we don't necessarily look at the food environment. It's not that just over the past 50 or 60 years that suddenly Americans just had so much less willpower, right? That we just all turned into moral failures. Like, look at what changed in our food environment. You went from it being like, highly processed foods, very energy dense things were treats, right? We're going to have this at holidays. We're going to have this at the birthday versus like, I can get fast food on any street corner. I have giant supermarkets where I have, like the end of the aisle things are right there for me to see, right? Like the most energy dense foods.
Well, having a treat is no longer a treat. That's just part of your daily routine. It's not a treat anymore. The fact that we have desserts every night, not everybody does, but that they're available. We can have candies and snacks and treats that are no longer a treat. That's just part of your routine. So it's not really a treat anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas it used to be called a treat because that was something fairly rare that people got. And now that's part of our daily norm, where we're eating these ultra processed foods regularly instead of sparingly.
You also see things like, so it reminds me of your parents when they were over in Germany. So, we had in the 50s and 60s, this explosion of life into the suburbs, right? Yeah. And much more time spent in traffic, commuting, much more time in sedentary activities, right? We shifted from, this industrialized economy into more of a service economy, technology, information. And so we've just gotten more sedentary over time as well. And so just by changing the environment that your parents were living in, crazy what happened.
Yeah, by living in Germany, they walked a lot more because they would catch buses and trains and things for transportation. So they were walking considerably more. They didn't have this massive fridge and a freezer and a deep freezer and whatever to buy and store shelf-stable, ultra-processed foods. So they were just going to the grocery store every day or two and buying fresh food without preservatives that weren't shelf-stable. And they both lost a considerable amount of weight just by changing their environment, both their food environment and their activity environment. And it was a big difference. And so there's definitely a way that Europe has it right over what we're doing. Although, unfortunately, kind of our sad diet, standard American diet is becoming more pervasive throughout the world.
Yeah. And so I think just like, those are really big levers that can be pulled on as environmental levers. And anyway, so we want to appreciate that. But what that tells us is this is a complex system, right? There's all these different inputs going into what we're consuming on the energy inside of the equation. And so that can make it really difficult, right? If I have a food environment like that, if I'm highly stressed, if, any number of things can cause some difficulty controlling that energy inside of things. All right.
Yeah.
And all right. So then let's do the calories outside of things. So I think this is one of the areas that we're often like, exercise, right? We think calories out, exercise alone. I've just got to exercise more. I've just got to exercise more. And in the energy outside of the equation, we've got several things. So first, we've got our resting metabolic rate. What does it cost to just keep the lights on? And so that's going to be a certain amount of energy out. What is our exercise activity? But often that's only about like 5% of our daily energy expenditure. So 60 to 70% of that is our resting metabolic rate, right? What it just keeps to keep our body running. And then you have our non-exercise activity. And so that can be up to 20% of that daily energy expenditure. And so that's a much bigger lever. And then we've got the thermic effect of food. So that is just how much energy does it cost to liberate nutrients from food. So protein has the highest TEF, we call it. So for every 100 calories, the TEF costs about 20 to 30. Less for carbohydrate, less for fat, and then mixed meals, right, somewhere in between. And so we have all those sides of the equations. But the biggest things in there are, again, our resting metabolic rate, and then for most people, our NEAT. There's some people that are doing extremes of exercise, right? Like there was a study they did that they ran, I can't even remember how many marathons they ran, like consecutively over the course of months. It was crazy, right?
Yeah.
Most people are not doing that.
Yeah, for sure. So the NEAT, the non-exercise activity, the reason why that's so important and why that's such a big lever, as you said, is because that's the majority of the time of our day that we can leverage instead of our exercise time. You can only exercise so much before you start to overtrain, where you get too fatigued, injuries start to happen, all of those things. And so I always tell people exercise is not where we lose weight. Rarely can exercise be where weight loss happens. Exercise is what tunes up the machine so that we burn more calories everywhere else in our day. So we burn more calories during NEAT when we have higher muscle mass, when we have better mitochondrial efficiency and density, when we're then living an active lifestyle. That exercise tuned up that machine so that we can be more active, that we can do activities more frequently with more enjoyment. We're more capable to do the activities that we love to do. We're less likely to get injured doing those activities. So NEAT is supported, and a high RMR is supported by exercise. So exercise is critical to the whole equation, but it isn't where we lose weight. So thinking I just need to spend more time in the gym isn't really the ticket. It's I need to spend that specific time in the gym, have it be targeted to what my goals are, but then I need to figure out how to live a more active lifestyle. So my parents living in Germany were not necessarily exercising a ton in terms of standard, like formal exercise. They did a little bit, and that helped tune up the machine so that when they were walking to their buses and trains and doing the other active things in their life, touring around and seeing all the sights in Europe and all those things. But that's where their weight loss came from, was during the non-exercise activities. That's where they actually burned the majority of calories. Because let's say you had a fairly strenuous workout even, and you burned 600 calories during that workout. If I increase my caloric burn by 50 to 100 calories an hour for the other 13, 14 hours I'm awake during the day, or more, um, my calorie burn is much, much greater than even that 1 hour of exercise. So just by making your life a little bit less efficient, instead of trying to carry all the groceries at once, take multiple trips, getting more steps in your day, things like that. That alone can really increase that non-exercise activity thermogenesis and then lead toward weight loss.
Absolutely.
So that's where we get the calories out, is through just moving more.
Absolutely. But then again, like, it's not that simple. So while we can see like these are the outputs, what can cause that to become more difficult? So a couple different things. As we lose weight, our body tends to go through a process that we call metabolic adaptation. And so we often will see a drop in people's resting metabolic rate that's above and beyond what we'd expect from the loss of mass alone. And so as we lose weight, the body's like, oh, okay, well, like, let's get more efficient. We don't need to devote as much energy to the reproductive system or to the immune system or to whatever other systems. We can tighten things up. We lose less energy as heat, and so that can cause our metabolic rate to drop. So now, like what was, a 200 calorie deficit might turn into, a 150 calorie deficit or a 100 calorie deficit because of those adaptations to our metabolism. That's one of the really nice things about, the cardio coach is that you can test that. We get a baseline, and then as people are going through a process of body composition change, we can track that and say, okay, like what's changing? Is this, are we seeing a much greater drop in metabolic rate than we'd expect? Do we need to change the timeline, right? Do we need to lose weight a little bit more slowly? Can we afford to lose weight a little bit more quickly? That really helps us make targeted decisions about how we kind of titrate that weight loss process.
Right. Because often in your journey, if you're starting, let's say that person for their body composition and where they're at, their RMR is at 2,100 calories. So you tell them, yeah, you can eat down to about 2,100 calories right now, and they lose weight. It may turn into 1,900 or 1,800 calories over time because they just have a lower requirement for calories. And it doesn't mean they didn't do a good job of preserving lean mass or things like that. They just have less body to take care of, so it doesn't require as much food. And so if we're not tracking that over time, we can get that calories in, calories out balance off by over fueling, even though that used to be the target number that adjusts over time.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's such an important point. And so retesting that allows us to, instead of just going from plateau to plateau to plateau, we see what's happening and we can adjust before that.
Well, so often people will say that, like, how often should I test somebody? Is it a one and done? Like I find out what your RMR is and we're good and that's your target. It's like, no, that number actually fluctuates depending on how aggressive you're being with your weight loss journey or weight gain journey or muscle building journey or whatever the changes you're trying to make in your body composition and lifestyle, whatever that is. The more aggressive you're being with that, the more frequently we should test to make sure that we're fueling the machine adequately. And
Absolutely.
so I know of some clinics that are testing every 2-3 weeks, which is probably maybe a little bit extreme because it takes your body a little bit more time than that to make a meaningful change. But somewhere between a 6 and 12 week mark for somebody going through an active period of change is actually pretty appropriate to retest in our clinic, we often would retest it about 8 to 10
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah.
And so that is a pretty appropriate number for somebody going through an active change cycle.
Yeah. One of the things that we can test, right, is we're then doing the VO2 max test. We can see like how many calories an hour are you using during exercise? That might change as well during the course of weight loss journey. And so being able to do that and prescribe exercise that's going to help them to tune up the system without overdoing things.
Well, and your heart rate zones change frequently as well. And so what was an effective zone may still be effective, but not as effective as it could be. As we improve in our fitness, you may start out where 115, 100 to 115 is your sweet spot for burning fat calories. But as your fitness improves, it may actually be up to 125 or 130. And so it doesn't mean that the 115 isn't still effective, but maybe at the 115, as you've improved your fitness, used to be 300 fat calories an hour. But now that I'm still burning a high percentage of fat up to 125, 130, now I might be burning closer to 400 calories of fat an hour. I can get so much more bang for my buck. It's going to feel about the same in terms of intensity because our fitness has improved so much. And so I can actually work out, relatively harder, burn more fat calories per hour and be more successful in my body composition change.
Absolutely. And having that data is so nice because it lets us know what's going to be the next best decision for your health and what's going well, what might need to change instead of just taking stabs in the dark.
Yeah.
And so that ends up being really nice. All right. So the next point is let's talk about some of the misconceptions around hormones, aging, menopause. My metabolism is broken. How many times have you heard that?
Oh, so many times. Do I even have a metabolism anymore? I've had that question all the time. I must have a really slow metabolism. And then we'll test them, especially on some of our larger clients. And we'll test somebody that, is over 400 pounds and their resting metabolic rate is like 3,000 calories. What? I thought I had a really slow metabolism. That's really fast. Relatively, it may not be that fast, but it's a high number because you have a lot of body mass that you're trying to take care of. And so we have to be careful with the fast versus slow. There's a lot of factors that go into fast versus slow. And so I've always said that it doesn't matter whether or not we're fast or slow.
Yeah.
It's more about where are you as an individual so that we can take the appropriate steps for you. And then we want to speed up your metabolism relative to you by increasing mitochondrial density and efficiency, by adding lean mass and all of those things. Like we can tune that up, even though it's probably going to drop as we change our body composition. And so it may relatively actually speed up even though that RMR number is going down. And so that's kind of a interesting conundrum where people are like, "Oh, is my metabolism slowing down?" It's like, "No, your body mass is dropping." And so your metabolism relatively may actually be increasing even though that RMR number is decreasing.
Yeah. When really your metabolism just is what it is, and we use that data to make a plan.
Yeah, yeah. We haven't found a very good, relative metabolism equation yet that really takes into account enough factors to say whether or not somebody's metabolism is fast or slow. We can compare it to age match and gender match norms and things like that. But there's so many variables there again that's not terribly helpful. It gives us a ballpark idea of how we compare. But again, it's more about where am I as an individual and what adaptations do I need to make because of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about metabolism across our lifespan.
Yeah.
Because this is one of the big myths that people think. I'm getting old. I'm in my 40s and my 50s. Like my metabolism is just slowing down. Like I can't do same things I used to. And so Herman Poncer, who's an evolutionary anthropologist, did a study with a big group that looked at metabolism across the lifespan. So from early years all the way till the later years. And what they found is that naturally, as you'd expect, there was a higher metabolism through youth and adolescence as we're building our bodies and body and tissue. But from about 20 to 60, metabolism was remarkably stable. Right, there weren't these big drops, and that like there was some drop after 60, but that across the whole thing, most of the variance was explainable by differences in activity level.
Yeah. If you track their step count, they would probably be in lockstep with one another. Same thing, in my opinion, when you hit 60, it's just you get more and more people retiring and things. And so their step count, their activity levels really drop.
They drop, and so that can be. And the thing is that those changes often happen on a long timeline, and so they're not as noticeable.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, oh, I didn't really realize that I went from 8,000 steps to 7,000 steps a day, and then 6,000. Right. It's just this low, long process. And then what else happens as we age? We tend to have more responsibility, less free time for certain things, and so that can increase our stress, which influences our appetite, which influences our sleep.
Yeah.
All those factors play into one another, and they can make changes to our lifestyle, to our habits that we don't even recognize because they're just changing slowly over time.
Yeah, I remember having this conversation with an electrician, a patient of mine who is an electrician, and I was like, he's like, "Oh, I hit 40 and I just, things fell apart. I gained all this weight and aging just caught up with me and whatever." And I was like, "Was it aging? Was it more your lifestyle? What happened around 40?" They said, "So prior to that, you were an electrician that was an employee and blah, blah, blah. Around 40, is that when you bought out your business and now you're the boss?" Yeah. "So you were on the line less and in the office more?" Yeah. "So you were sitting at a desk where you used to be up, moving and doing?" Yeah. He said, "At home, did your kids hit, kind of that busy driving around in the car, eating out quite a bit because you're, going from activity to activity with your kids and blah, blah, blah?" It's like, yeah. So all of a sudden we talked through those lifestyle shifts as he kind of hit his 40s and mid 40s and 50s, and as his responsibilities in the office and those types of things happened more, and he became, as we have to adult harder. But that happens, in corporate jobs or other things where we just take on more responsibility. And so we're finding that we're more sedentary, higher levels of stress and high, those types of factors, more lost sleep because the decisions you're making aren't just affecting this job, but the company as a whole. So you're increasing stress, you're decreasing sleep because your teenagers are never home and blah, blah, blah,
You don't know anything about that though, do you? Okay.
but all of those, all of those factors start to weigh in kind of all at the same time. And so we find that energy levels decrease and fat increases and all of these things at this time. But it's more about our shift in lifestyle as we age than it is about our metabolism just falling apart magically.
Yeah.
It's that all of a sudden these things kind of converge
All around the same time.
all around the same time, that we have to adult a little bit harder with each decade of life. More is expected of us. And so those types of things just kind of converge to make it more challenging for sure.
Yeah.
And so it's not that those things aren't real, that we hit our 40s and whatever, and that it isn't harder, but it's not harder necessarily because of age. It's typically more because of responsibilities and stress levels and poor sleep and all of these things that tend to compound kind of at the same time. And so it's battling those things and establishing routines. And I wish that's what we taught more in our 20s and 30s
Absolutely.
of how to establish those routines now so that we survive our 40s, 50s, 60s better.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll just let lifestyle carry the freight of ourself let lifestyle carry the freight of our health instead of just relying on our own motivation, our own willpower, and beating ourselves up when we just couldn't, we couldn't resist today. And so like having that structure in place, I think can be really helpful.
So I think it's really fun when you get a 20 or 30 something in the office that's kind of that health conscious and that forward thinking, because often you don't like to invest in yourself at that point in time in your life because everything's good. Like my metabolism is still healthy. My body is still doing good. I'm still Superman. And so you don't think about that as much, but it was always so fun because I could help set the table of these are the things that you need to start doing now in your life so you don't become your parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's like, what's the commercials that they're like, it's like an insurance commercial. Don't become your dad. Like, oh, this couch needs 100 pillows.
Yeah.
It's okay. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. Unfortunately, we often don't see the reality of I'm becoming my parents until we're in our 40s and 50s. And so then part of that is we start to have more disposable income where we can afford to invest in ourselves a little bit more and things like that. But man, if we could establish some of those habits and patterns with our employees or things within our sphere of influence, if we could establish those healthy patterns earlier in people's lives, we really could save them a lot of grief later.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked about before, right? Diseases run in family, but so do diets, and so do behavioral patterns, and so does psychology, right? And so all of those things can influence both sides of that equation, right? The energy in, energy out. Now, sometimes there are real health issues, right? Things going on in biology that do make this more difficult. But I think the topic of hormones has become very vogue, and we have veered into maybe outside the science, right? Outside what the science tells us. And like, even if there are hormonal changes, that's still captured on either side of the equation. And so, for example, if you truly have low thyroid hormone, that's going to affect your metabolic rate. That's going to affect your mood. That's going to affect your appetite. And so it's affecting like, how much am I wanting to eat? But it's also affecting how much I move. And a lot of that can be unconscious. It's accounted for in that NEAT. I just feel worse. And so I don't move as much throughout the day as a consequence.
Yeah.
Estrogen, right? So one of the things that we see with estrogen, particularly in menopause, is that estrogen tends to lead to a different, it tends to give a different body fat distribution.
Right. Right. We tend to, with higher levels of estrogen, we tend to see more like hips, buns, and thighs, breast development.
Yeah.
Or fat deposits in those areas. Whereas with more testosterone or lack of estrogen, we see more belly fat.
Yeah. And so what can happen sometimes is menopause, that drops down, and then like body fat might not have changed, body weight might not even change, but the distribution of that body fat may change. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh my, what happened, right? I turned 40 or 50 or whatever, and everything changed.
I hear this a lot in the clinic of like, I can still wear the same pants or skirts or whatever, but my belly fat is increasing. And that's often a change in the decrease in estrogen.
Yeah. And then along with that high stress, right? We know that chronically increased levels of cortisol can also lead to more central deposition of fat. And so like those are things to consider. And whether, people choose to go on hormone replacement therapy or, right, working to manage stress better, that can address some of those factors. But also estrogen is joint protective.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes people feel like more aches and pains. It's like, oh, well, like working out now, like I don't recover as well, or it hurts more. And so what changes, right? I move less. I don't do the same exercise. And so again, these are very real things that are happening biologically. And so that, again, to your point, it doesn't mean that this isn't challenging, that this isn't hard, but our laws still follow the same laws of physics. And so whether those changes cause my appetite to go up, cause the energy in to go up, or those changes cause the energy out to go down, or some combination of the two, it's still going to be captured in that equation. And so again, what are we doing to help with those things, right? That's, that's where those therapies can come into place. That's where measuring what's happening with your metabolism, looking at what happens when you exercise, doing things like DEXA scans can be really helpful to manage those differences in biology.
Right. Because it's not that calories in, calories out isn't still true. It's just that it's not that simple.
Mm-hmm.
And the factors that influence what calories come in and what calories go out just become more complicated with aging and with changes in hormones and or other disease processes and stuff like that. So it's calories in, calories out still holds true. It's just not that simple.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that I've seen happen is that, and again, like it isn't necessarily an either or, right? Either we just make lifestyle changes or we use some of these other helpful interventions. It doesn't have to be. The problem is that we often use, these outside interventions as band-aids to fix the underlying problem. And then we just onboard, a bunch of medications or a bunch of modalities or whatever that could actually be addressed with lifestyle changes, right? And so like the example that I always give is like, oh my gosh, my sleep is so crappy. So I'm going to take something to help me sleep at night. And then I wake up and I'm so groggy, I'm so tired. So now I'm going to onboard something to help me wake up. Yeah. And so I'm just like, something help me sleep, something help me wake up. Versus, okay, well, what's causing the poor sleep, right?
Well, and then the thing that makes me wake up causes me to have high blood pressure. So now I'm taking a blood pressure pill. And then like we're taking medications to mask the symptoms of our other medications or, those types of things. And so it becomes a very messy, like what's the real root cause of this?
Yeah. Yeah. And so again, like this is not to poo-poo on those things. Like they can be very helpful, but it's just not using those. Like I think the danger comes when we use those and we don't take a look at any of those lifestyle factors that are affecting things. And so it's like, I can be on, medications, I can be using different modalities to help as I go through this process of making these small, simple changes to my lifestyle and seeing if that helps me balance the equation better.
Yeah. So I was looking at this with a patient. Well, I've done this several times, but one in particular is kind of coming to mind where I believe they were on 18 different medications. And probably 14, as we kind of counted through it, were really to manage the symptoms of a key 4 medications. And those key 4 medications were all things that really, if we got lifestyle under control, they could reduce or go off of those altogether. And so 18 medications, of which really they only needed to probably take 4. And those 4 we probably could have eliminated, especially had we started in their 20s, 30s, 50s. They probably would have never needed to go on them at all. And so it is what it is at that point. There's still a role and a place. I'm not a big advocate for like, just go off those medications and focus on your lifestyle.
Yeah.
There's a delicate balance there, obviously.
Yeah, nuance for sure.
Yeah, very nuanced. And can people eventually work their way off of some of those medications? Yes. Does that take a lot of consistency and hard work and dedication and working very closely with their providers? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But so some people can. It's in our current kind of environment, it's not likely that they'll go off of all of those. But it's just sad to see how much we're treating so many other problems because of a couple of key lifestyle factors that we could put in place that would really regulate those things.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about the real levers of sustainable weight loss. Sustainable is key because there are things that we can do to quickly lose weight.
Yeah.
But what impact does that have on our long-term health? What impact does it have on our our lifestyle.
Yeah, if you want to drive your resting metabolic rate down really, really fast, lose weight quickly. And then it becomes very harder to sustain that weight loss when we've driven our resting metabolic rate down that
Yeah,
quickly, because that means we've lost a lot of those efficiencies in our muscle mass, bone density, mitochondria, all those things.
yeah.
And that's the unfortunate side effect of losing weight quickly is the shift in kind of our overall capacity to burn calories.
Absolutely. And I think the thing to appreciate here is our body's actually great at doing things to keep us alive. Like, thank you, body, for doing that. Right. And
Yeah.
so in our current culture, like, we really have demonized fat, but fat is an essential thing. Like,
Oh, so important
for
for
hormones.
survival, for
Yeah,
giving us food storage, so that we can survive rainy days
absolutely.
or non-rainy days.
Like, for humans, our ability to store fat is essentially unlimited. Like, in terms of being able to weather, famine, major environmental disasters and things, like, that's actually an incredible adaptation. And so our body is just working the way that it was designed, over the course of evolutionary history to do what it does best, right? To keep us alive and to help us to, propagate the next generation. And so I think, when we go into those extreme things, the body's just like, I guess I'm in a period of starvation. It doesn't know that we just want to lose weight. It just says, I'm sensing highly reduced nutrient inflow. And so I've got to batten down the hatches because we're going into starvation.
Yeah, I got to shut some things down so that I can preserve as much of that fat as I can to weather whatever this storm is. Unfortunately, it doesn't know that we live in a very industrial society and all of those things.
Yeah.
It just thinks we're still kind of back in survival times,
Yeah.
being chased by bears and surviving a harsh winter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what are some of the things on that appetite regulation side of things? So as we mentioned before, looking at those things, is the food really energy dense? Does it have a lot of calories per gram? And is it hyper palatable? Do I just want to eat so much of that? Is that combination of fat and sweet and sugar? That's probably going to be more likely for me to overeat. And so can I eat things that are less energy dense, right? More nutrient dense. So fresh fruits and vegetables, things like that, have a lot of water content in them. Oh, so this is actually an interesting thing I want to mention. So in some of the research that Kevin Hall did, what they found is that I can't remember what the 4 diets were, but like one of them was minimally processed foods, and people just naturally ate less. So ad libitum, you can just eat however much you want, and just on minimally processed foods, they just ate less. But what they said is that, like, they felt fine on any of the diets, right? It wasn't like all of a sudden, oh, now I'm just starving with the minimally processed diet. And so that was one of the cool things, is that it's like, if I start to change my food patterns, my eating patterns, it doesn't necessarily mean like I have to be miserable. And so anyway, think about that. So, what's that energy density? Protein can be helpful with satiety, and protein is really important in maintaining muscle mass, right? And as we talked about before, muscle is really one of the organs of longevity. And so getting enough protein can help with appetite, and then with just keeping our musculoskeletal system healthy. Fiber is important, helps us to digest slower, and in terms of mortality risk, helps to reduce our risk from certain things, especially like colorectal cancers.
Yeah, helps us digest, slow down absorption of food, but also keeps digestion moving. Really important.
Yep. And then, some things that we talked about before, how can I make my sleep better, right? What are things I can look at there? Do I need to change something about that environment? How do I manage stress better, right? Do I need to go talk to someone, and develop a more robust set of tools to help me manage the stresses of life? And then how is the food environment designed in my house? Like, again, it's not that any of these changes can be difficult, right?
Right.
Going against patterns that we've set up over the course of decades, often we can feel some internal resistance, but even external resistance, right? The people in our environment.
Yeah, family members can give you a hard time for, how come you're not eating blah blah blah? Are you trying to be healthy now? Or they give you a hard time, and it's like, yeah, I am. I watched a video that was really sad actually the other day, of somebody that was in their room with the door like partially open, and they were doing sit-ups, I believe it was, and his wife caught him doing the sit-ups and started laughing at him like, "What? Do you think you're gonna change your body for the new year, you New Year's resolution?" It's like, how sad is that? That instead of being like, "Hey, good job. Way to start off the new year right." That she made fun of him and he got up and was embarrassed and stopped. And unfortunately, we do tend to do that, whether it's food decisions or other things. We tend to make it harder for other people to be successful, and whether that's our own insecurities or just habits and traditions and things like that. We want people like, "Hey, I'm gonna eat this pie, so you better eat this pie too," versus being like, "Hey, good job for not eating the pie." Like, I don't have that willpower or whatever right now. We tend to discourage them and want them to jump on the sinking ship with us instead of, being glad that they were able to get on the life raft.
Yeah, yeah,
It's funny how we tend to do that. So food environment, I think, is so important, but also part of that food environment is planning.
yeah,
If we want to pull on that lever of the appetite regulation, having a solid plan in place helps us to avoid times when we get hungry. By having a plan in place where we eat regularly or have snacks in place, where we make decisions instead of just reactions to our food, that can really help. When we have a plan, it helps us make decisions instead, where we tend to just react to our food environment. But if we can have a plan in place of like, oh, when I get hungry around 3 o'clock, right before I go home from work and blah, 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 here's what I'm going to do versus go hit the break room and see if somebody brought in donuts or whatever. If I have a specific plan in place of like, oh, need to make sure I always have apples stocked up or protein this or that or whatever, having a plan in place helps us to make better decisions versus just kind of reacting and then going for the easiest solution.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's so many things available now that can help us with that. So not everyone has time to meal plan or to go shopping and do all the things. And so for some people, like maybe a meal delivery once or twice a week works financially, and it just works to reduce some of the stress so that they can, develop
And the
those,
decision fatigue.
the decision fatigue, right?
Yeah.
Like that can be so difficult. Or, we sometimes poo poo on like frozen fruits and vegetables, but it's like that can be great. Like I just take that bag, I stick it in the microwave. They're actually picked at the peak of nutrient density, and so it's like, oh no, you got to have fresh fruits and vegetables, right? You had to pick that out of the produce aisle versus the freezer section. Like, hey, if I can, put that in the microwave, and then that's going to help me to develop a healthier eating pattern. Like,
Right.
fantastic.
Well, and it's a good, better, best thing. If we could all shop at farmers markets and get fresh fruits and vegetables all year round and blah, 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 that'd be great.
Yeah.
That's not our reality. And so if, frozen fruits and vegetables, which actually, like you said, may actually have as high of nutrient density as the ones in the grocery store sometimes. Like our apples and some other fruits are picked sometimes months or years. Apples on the shelf can be 18 months, 2 years old. They expose them to gases that don't allow them to ripen and then expose them to other gases that ripen them when they're put out on the shelf and stuff. So, it's not always a bad choice to eat frozen fruits and vegetables and can be a good segue into making healthier food choices.
Well, that principle of good, better, best, like our food choices are on a spectrum. And I think, again, just taking the moral weight out of our food decisions, right? Food that's easier to overeat is not bad. It's just easier to overeat, right?
Right.
And then the low end of the spectrum. So like, let's say that you have a whole apple on one hand, and we have apple pie with caramel syrup on the other hand, right? It's not that I can't, like, maybe instead of eating a whole pie, I just have 2 slices, right? And then maybe I start adding in some, apples with dip or, some applesauce or different things. And I'm moving down that spectrum, and I can still enjoy those things at that highly energy dense and highly palatable thing.
Yeah.
But we shift that from becoming regular to special events, and we do that over time, right? We don't have to have this abrupt shift and change everything. That's typically unsustainable, and that leads to yo-yo dieting, and that leads to a lot of negative self-talk and stuff. But I think just this good, better, best, this spectrum mentality of like, what types of food help me to feel good? I don't have indigestion. It gives me energy to do the activities that I want. Like asking that question instead of good food or bad food. Like, what's going to fuel me in a way that I can recover well, that I can exercise the way that I want, that I can participate in the activities that I want.
It's a mentality shift for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then, so we've got appetite regulation. Our energy expenditure side of the equation.
Yeah, our next big lever is that energy expenditure.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what you mentioned earlier. Like, how can we use exercise to tune up the system
Yeah.
so that we can get more of that activity throughout the day? And some of this, like there can be simple changes. So I used to rib Cameron about this. He finds the furthest parking spot away, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, why would you do that? Like, I've got to go see the movie. I want to be the closest possible, right? It's this mentality shift. Like, well, like, actually, I could walk a little bit more. It's an easy decision. It's an easy change. And then, like, is that going to, drastically change my health over time? Like, maybe not, but like, I get a few more steps each time that I go to a store or go to the movie theater or.
So I do that. I'm kind of weird. My kids always are like, "Oh my gosh,
We're
you
so
have to
far
park this
away."
far away." But it's like it's a few more steps. It's not like a huge change.
Well, and typically, like,
It adds up.
maybe a minute to 2 minutes more of walking.
Not even.
If that.
Because I
That's
walk
true.
quickly.
That's true.
I walk fairly quickly, or often when I'm just by myself running errands or things like that, I jog everywhere I go. So like
It's true.
yeah. Anyway, so and I'm not saying that I do it right. I'm just saying that's something I found that works for my life and lifestyle. That it's easy for me to just, park at the back of the parking lot at the mall or whatever, and then just jog in. I'm there faster. I'm often in the store faster than the person that's still searching for that parking spot, one away from the accessible parking spot and whatever, I hate waiting for other cars to park. Maybe that's where it really stems from. That it's just my impatience. So I'm going to park back here and jog in so that I'm there anyway.
But you've leveraged that in patience for,
Yeah.
something good.
But that it's finding ways to create that non-exercise activity in your life and lifestyle. It's finding ways to become less efficient often and getting more steps in. So oftentimes when we tell somebody that you need to be hitting that, 10 to 15,000 steps a day, blah, 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 that seems very intimidating. And honestly, can injure people. If they go from the average American is between 2,500 and 5,000 steps a day. So if you tell them we need to triple or quadruple your movement pattern, that can lead to injuries, plantar fasciitis, knee pain, back pain, hip pain. Really, really common when people start out on a fitness regimen that they wind up training into an injury because they multifold increase their activity level overnight versus saying, hey, over this next year, I want you to try to increase your daily step average by 100 steps per week or 100 steps per day per week.
Yeah.
So if you're at 2,500 now, over the next, 25 weeks, we would expect that would go up by, a significant amount. And then we're eventually up to that 10,000 steps. It doesn't have to be start doing 10,000 steps a day.
Yeah.
It's build up to that 10,000 steps so your body can all those tissues can attenuate to those new loads. And we can build that as a habit and a lifestyle in a way that's much more doable than 2,500 steps to 10,000.
Yeah.
Like, let's just increase that slowly, allow your body to adapt, allow your habits to adapt, allow your family to adapt to the fact that you're parking in the back of the parking lot now. And so I once had a colleague, he's an occupational therapist that I worked with that was complaining over lunch one day. He's like, my dad just got a prescription from his doctor to buy a treadmill. So insurance is going to help him buy a treadmill. At first I was like, cool. Like, that's great that he was able to get that. He's like, but then in the same visit, the doctor prescribes him a handicap parking pass. He's like, just park your butt at the back of the parking lot and walk in. You don't need a treadmill. I thought, that's actually a really good point that like, if we're trying to encourage healthy activity and healthy lifestyles, maybe the handicap parking spot, or whatever, the accessible parking spot pass is not the way to go. And so it was a really funny conversation. He was so worked up about it. But yeah, the idea is let's just get more movement into our life and lifestyle, use our exercise to support the lifestyle. So I think that's a helpful mentality shift too for helping people become more consistent with their strength training and cardiovascular work is helping them to say, okay, here are the activities that I enjoy doing. And here's how we can make your exercise support those different activities. And then it's not drudgery. It's not punishment for bad eating or things like that. exercise becomes targeted towards my lifestyle. And so if I can see how this squat is going to help me be able to do my activity that I love to do, now it becomes more excitement instead of drudgery. Like, oh, I'm going to play pickleball so much better when I get my footwork down because I have better hip strength from this exercise that I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, this actually reminds me of a conversation I had a client once where we were talking about this process, and the particular client had enjoyed ballet and horseback riding. And so it was like, what ballet motion does this one mimic? Or, oh, this is like putting the saddle on the horse, or this is, scooping hay, or this is, doing this thing.
Right.
And so being able to relate the different exercise movements to something that this client really enjoyed was a helpful reframe to be like, oh yeah, again, it's supporting the activities that I want to do.
Yeah. Where do you get sore when you're riding? Core. Oh, my hips get sore from squeezing and trying to stay forward in the saddle when we're trotting and things like that. Like, okay, like when certain things get sore, think of this exercise is what's going to help prevent that soreness. Okay, now that becomes excitement instead of drudgery.
Absolutely. In the same conversation about energy expenditure is just overall metabolic health, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so that's where that exercise comes in. Do I have sufficient muscle mass? Do I have a well-developed aerobic system? So when we look at the research on combining both aerobic training and resistance training, the impacts on health, on mortality risk are just very robust, right? They make a big difference.
Yep.
And conditions that are co-occurring, right? So one of the benefits of exercise, particularly resistance exercise, is your bodies and your muscles need that energy quickly. And so it can actually pull glucose into the cell independently of insulin. And so that's a way to help with insulin sensitivity, with helping to regulate blood sugar over time. Like, getting healthier is going to impact all of our systems. And even if people have active disease processes going on, the exercise will usually help with that. There was a research article released a few years ago. It was called "Exercise is the Real Polypill" or something like that. And it just talked about how exercise impacts every body system. We know that it has robust, effects on the cardiovascular system, respiratory system, musculoskeletal system. But even cognitively, like, there's been a lot of research into effects on mood regulation and cognition and things like that.
They say that regular exercise is maybe one of the most important drugs that we can take for mental health.
Absolutely. And so combining these things, and I think the point that we want to drive home is, again, that it's not just one thing. It's looking at these different areas and what are small, simple changes that I can make in my lifestyle to support those. And I think what we see a lot of times, especially on social media, is it's one thing, or you're doing this one thing wrong. You just got to change this. And then people are ashamed of that thing, and they're like, oh, I guess nothing I'm doing is right. And there's a lot of things that most people are doing that are actually great, right? And we can leverage those to develop healthier habits over time. And so the message that like, you're not broken, you haven't necessarily been doing everything wrong. It's just like, get good data, right? Like, let's take a look at how your body systems are working, right?
Yeah.
What's your metabolic rate? If you're going to get a DEXA scan, like, what is your body composition? Doing the VO2 test, like, how does your body respond to exercise? Where are you efficient? Where are you not efficient? What are limitations that show up in that type of testing? Getting that really good data set, so then we can say, okay, what are the easiest levers to pull, right? What's going to have the biggest bang for your buck? And what are these simple tweaks that we can start making to support better health, to reduce the shame, to increase self-efficacy, right? I can do this, and I can do this consistently. And to that point, as we're making lifestyle changes, as we're looking to lose weight, for example, what can I stick to consistently? So when they look at people that are successful with long-term weight loss, adherence is one of the primary factors.
Yeah.
People can lose and maintain weight on a variety of diets, right? Low fat, low carb, keto, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's what one works with my inputs and outputs, right? What works with my physiology and psychology to produce the effects that I'm looking for, that sets me on the trajectory towards building a healthier lifestyle. Right. And that's going to be a little bit different for everyone. And so that really is, we take the science, we get that data, And then it's the art of coaching. How do I look at the constraints in this person's life, right? Whether that's time or money or, some mental or psychological factors. What are those constraints? How do I work within those constraints to develop a nutrition pattern, an activity pattern, a stress pattern that's going to help them be successful over the long term?
Yeah. We often talk in our clinic about the patterns, right? That we see life as just a series of patterns. And so helping people identify what their current pattern is in one of those lifestyle areas, and then just making edits to the pattern is the key. And so that really, I think, is an important distinction there between um, you know, a diet, this thing that I'm going to do, versus a pattern I'm going to try to establish for the long term. I think that is a key distinction that helps people really get on the right track and understand that, you know, there are certain principles of, like, fat loss happens more on the calories in side of the equation is where fat loss comes from. And the calories out is more, so our movement and exercise and NEAT, all the things we've talked about, is more about the health improvement. And so that balance of doing both helps us to really not only lose weight, but become more healthy in the process. And so even though exercise isn't necessarily where weight loss happens, it's where the support structure is built for being able to maintain that weight loss and maintain a healthy lifestyle that helps us keep that weight off, that helps reinforce the healthy food decisions that we're making, helps us feel better so we have fewer cravings and more motivation to make those healthier choices, and it overall reduces our risks to our health. And so it sets the table, that combination of being more mindful of our eating patterns while being more mindful also of our movement patterns. Really, that's that calories in, calories out equation. It's just so much more nuanced than just calories in, calories out.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And just really, how do we develop those healthy patterns? One last point that I want to speak to really quick. We could end that like that. That was such a good. This is just an important point because I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with a friend. I think that we mentioned on the podcast before. He was talking to a client, and the person said, like, I need to lose 30 pounds, and he's like, okay, well, like, what if that was 30 pounds of muscle? No, I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
And so, like, body composition changes, right? Where we are increasing muscle mass, where we're reducing unhealthy fat mass, is more important than weight loss, right? Because I could lose 30 pounds of muscle, right? And that's going to have major negative impacts on my metabolic health, on my mortality risk.
Yeah.
And so healthy body composition includes, like, enough lean mass, and not just like enough to, avoid major problems, but enough to live life on my terms, right?
Yeah.
To be able to do the things that I love to do.
Yeah. Well, and I think we often get stuck on weight on the scale. So my personal journey, I guess, I got married, I weighed 120 pounds. So I was so ridiculously skinny and really couldn't gain weight. I tried. And at that point in time, now I can. I can successfully gain weight now. But for whatever reason, I was very, very thin, 120 pounds. So skinny. Over time, I've been able to put weight on, and now I struggle to keep weight off. Not really, but I have to work at it more. There's always this, like, did I get less healthy? Was I, should I be back closer to that 120 pounds? No, that's way too thin. But what's interesting is my pant size has only gone up by like one size. I wear a 30 or a 31 waist size. I used to wear a 29 or a 30.
Yeah.
So, like, just depending on the fit of the pant. So it's not that I really have gained a bunch of fat or anything like that. I definitely have more muscle mass than I did back then, which is a great thing, which
Yeah.
is a good thing. But it's just interesting how we let weight on the scale kind of mess with our minds, where I always am thinking I probably should be down a few pounds, when I look at some of the other factors though, and I'm like, actually, I'm pretty good. I still want to focus on adding lean muscle mass
Yeah.
and improving my cardiovascular health, and I can always make improvements there. And so that's good to focus on. But it's funny how weight on the scale messes with our heads so much.
Absolutely. Well, and to that point, right, losing weight can actually make us less healthy.
Less healthy.
And maintaining weight, like, we can maintain weight and dramatically improve our health. So this was your point with exercise. Independent of weight loss, exercise will improve our metabolic health and it will reduce our risk. And so there was this has been replicated in other research, but there was a famous study by Blair in 1989 where they looked at cardiovascular health versus like BMI. And they found that people that had the healthiest BMI, but were at the lowest fitness, were at a much higher risk of mortality than people that were overweight, but at the highest level of fitness. And so fitness is super important. And so I think that's the thing to understand is that exercise is not just about weight on the scale. It's about improving all those body systems and increasing our health, increasing our lifespan, but also our health span. How long can I ably do the things that I want to do without major restrictions?
Right. So if we can get that piece of it under control and improve our cardiovascular and muscular fitness to a point that we're actually pretty healthy there, and then dial in the calories inside of things on, focus on fueling our body, fueling the machine. Those things tend over time, the point I kind of made at the beginning. We focus on the process, the outcome kind of takes care of itself over time. And so
Yeah,
we have to allow for that time, but that's the key, is focusing on the process of making those patterns, establishing those healthy patterns of getting good, strength and good muscle mass built up, getting a robust cardiovascular system, and then start changing our mentality on the calories inside of the equation toward fueling that machine that we just built. And usually the weight takes care of itself.
absolutely, absolutely. And so I think bottom line is that calories in, calories out, or energy in, energy out, like that isn't the like that isn't the weight loss plan. That's just how our bodies work, right? But also, as you mentioned, it's not so simple. There's all of these inputs that factor into, the decisions that we make in terms of calories in and on how we move, on how we exercise. And so I think just it's not, if we struggle with maintaining a certain body composition, if we struggle with losing weight, that's not a character flaw, it's not a moral flaw. It's just my friend talks about it as like a skill gap, a will gap, or an environment gap, right? So maybe I just need to develop new skills around, this behavior. It's like I once didn't know how to drive a car. I developed the skill of learning how to drive, right? There's many things that are learnable, but we're like, oh, I just can't do that, right? This must mean something about me. It's like, oh, no, that means nothing about you. This is just a new skill to develop.
Right.
A will gap is maybe there's something in my mindset that needs to shift, right? I don't know how to manage stress well, or I have a lot of negative self-talk, or I've been influenced by the beliefs of people around me that cause me to maybe make poor decisions for my health. And so what are things that I can do to address those mindset issues? Like maybe that's talking to a therapist. Maybe that's, there's a variety of things that can be helpful in that domain. And then an environment gap, right? Sometimes our environment just puts really strong pressure on us.
Yeah.
And so are there things that I can do to help change that environment over time and start to shift my behavior, start to shift my habits, and start to shift my health. And so the goal is not to fight biology, but to work with it, right? Again, get that good data and then use that to make decisions for your health.
Right. Getting quality data, getting the tests done so you know your RMR, you know your heart rate zones, you know where to work out for your body, getting that quality information so that we can respond appropriately to our body and our body system so that we can fuel the machine appropriately, so that we can build up the machine appropriately without getting burned out, fatigued, or injured, that we really can treat our body right. So that we can get this calories in, calories out equation right, because it is so nuanced. There are so many factors. So getting the right data helps us to get that equation right. And it can become more of an equation instead of this nebulous thing of like, I have no idea. And I try to restrict calories, but then there's all these things. It's often because we're restricting too much or other things. And so we can get the right data, use that cardio coach, get that RMR done, get that VO2 test done so that we can dial in your heart rate zones. We really can finally be successful. And also, I love showing people why they haven't been successful in the past, and they'll often be frustrated, like, oh, so I've been doing it wrong. It's like, no, your efforts haven't been wrong. They just haven't been guided in the right direction. And now we finally can help guide your decision making that you're making with your food and nutrition and with your exercise side of the equation We can make sure that both the calories in and calories out are dialed in for your body. And that makes such a difference when it's finally like, oh, this is based on me and
Yeah.
not the stab in the dark. Makes all the difference in the world for helping people transform their life and lifestyle.
Absolutely. Well, we could talk about this forever, absolutely. But hopefully that was helpful in kind of making this make more sense conceptually, but also like what are some boots on the ground things that we can do to build that healthier lifestyle. And so we appreciate you joining us. Again, as always, if you want more content like this, remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode. Ready to take your metabolic testing to the next level? Visit core.com to learn more about purchasing our metabolic test equipment.